Adaptations can be fascinating. Let's take the essence of an IP and change the storytelling medium. Common adaptations include from a book to a movie and a movie to a video game. It can be done well, but also go horribly wrong. A unique case is adapting past tech to newer tech in the same medium, like adapting a silent film to a talkie. This can also be done well, or become an unfortunate trend. Because video games are so new and the technology changes so fast, a game can be invented within the limited technology at the time, and then years later, that gameplay can be adapted to reflect advances in technology and game design. Now, I'm not talking about games that slowly iterate their gameplay over time. I'm talking about when a game has been dead for a decade and then bursts back on the scene, boasting that it's the same game but modernized. Allow me to illustrate with my favorite game of this kind, Q*bert, for the PlayStation 1. Our story begins in 1982. Eye of the Tiger was topping the charts, E.T. the Extraterrestrial was the #1 movie in theaters, and in video games, the arcade was king. Players would take turns inserting coins and replaying the same levels again and again, improving their high scores to compare with their friends. The biggest barriers for video game development were space and computing power. In order to save memory on the cartridge, graphics were displayed with sprites, and music was often limited to small jingles when a level began. Q*bert was one of the best games of this time. Players control Q*bert as he hops from cube to cube, avoiding enemies and trying to get all of the cubes to the correct color. It starts out easy, with Q*bert needing to hop on each cube once to progress, but then, as the level increases, the player will need to hop on a cube twice, and later, a puzzle element is included that will revert a cube if Q*bert backtracks to it. Enemies will come from every direction, the top, the bottom, and even the sides, with Coily the Snake relentlessly chasing after Q*bert during a game. It made the most of the limited memory by repeating the pyramid shape, but advancing the mechanics, enemies, and colors as the player progresses. It keeps to the game design of the time by adding constant pressure to the player, with a small window of relief to reset mentally before charging into the fray again. Players are rewarded with a higher score if they can play longer and more skillfully with a single coin, granting them bragging rights over their peers. Q*bert is chaos on a screen, but if the player takes time to understand the enemy patterns and how to operate the puzzles, then it's one of the best games to get a player in the zone and hit them with that feeling of flow. Q*bert was ported to a variety of home consoles, but after his heyday in the 80s, Q*bert was laid to rest for a time. The year is now 1999. The #1 song is Believe by Cher, Star Wars: The Phantom Menace is in theaters, and everyone is talking about the impending doom from the inevitable Y2K bug. Video games have migrated from the arcade to the home console, where players can play together or head-to-head. Players now purchase the entire game, with hopes of embarking on a grand adventure with a satisfying ending. Memory limitations have been all but solved with the compact disc. This has led the way for a new dimension of play, and this fancy new way of displaying graphics with polygons. This was the year that Q*bert was stirring, getting ready for his big return. But things had changed in those 10 years, and Q*bert wanted to take advantage of all of them. We start by updating the game to use modern tech. Change the graphics from pixels to polygons, add music to the game, but preserve the charm of the original. There was an attempt to create digitized voices for Q*bert in the 80s, but it just made Q*bert sound frustrated. So they included a speech bubble to emphasize this frustration and kept it in the game. Add a cool transition that wouldn't be possible back then, but is easy now, and we have Q*bert without the limitations of 1982. But the developers at Artec Studios understood that much more had changed since that original release, and instead of just porting the game, created a full adaptation to meet the game design and player expectations of the time. The biggest change in game design was the games were now designed to be won instead of repeated until they were lost. Players look forward to the plot that would contextualize what the character's goal is and how their inputs would help achieve it. So Q*bert includes a full adventure mode, with different worlds, new mechanics, and more characterization for Q*bert. This is now the main mode of the game, instead of the classic mode. But the essence of that classic game has been transplanted to the adventure mode. Each level is made up of a few sections that must be completed with a set number of lives, similar to the classic mode where the player had to complete 4 pyramids before advancing to the next level. The arcade game had to use the enemies to increase the difficulty, but now the shape of the stage can be used to challenge the player in new ways and keep the game looking fresh as the player progresses. The adventure mode is framed with cutscenes to provide context for Q*bert and why he is traversing mountains, volcanoes, and power plants. Q*bert is chasing after Coily, who has captured Q*dina, and Q*bert means business. After playing through the 5-hour adventure, players are rewarded with the villain getting his comeuppance and a choreographed dance scene starring a much more debonair Q*bert. But there is still something missing. There are 2 controller ports instead of a single joystick. So Artec Studios included a head-to-head multiplayer mode. Q*bert races against Q*dirk for cube color dominance. The first player to light up all of their cubes can exit the stage, forcing the other player to lose out on those potential points. There are also some green cubes that can sway the game in one player's favor or facilitate a great comeback. This is the best mode to introduce a friend to Q*bert, providing a safe space to figure out the controls and the basics before heading into classic or adventure mode. Q*bert for the PlayStation 1 is Q*bert, but modernized for the time. This game was built knowing that players purchase games differently in 1999 and have different expectations on how games should be played. But the best part is that core gameplay of Q*bert that leads to that feeling of flow is present in all the modes in this game. Head-to-head, adventure, and of course classic. What game would you hope would get this revival treatment? I have one game in mind that can only be found on 8-bit consoles today. It's a head-to-head battle for information that plays out like a real-time game of Clue. We need a modern revival of this game so that a new generation can experience it. Check out this video to hear my pitch for a revival and how I may be pushed to make it myself.